All right, I am a big believer in starting on time, so we will follow that pattern. There you go. Welcome everyone. My name is John Bristowe. I'm a member of the team at Octopus Deploy. Thank you for taking the time to join me here today to learn a little bit about what we're doing at Octopus Deploy around AI. Before I begin, I did want to share with you some personal anecdotes. Richard Campbell is actually a personal friend of mine. I've known Richard for a long time. And the talk that he just gave here actually spoke very truly to me because I have a lot of skin in the game. My dad's a radiologist, so I know a lot about what's happening there. I've been dealing with AI for quite a while. I studied it as part of my computer science degree at university. And my mother had lung cancer, or has been cured of lung cancer, and part of that was due to gene therapy. And I have no doubt in my mind that that was largely in part to a lot of the work that was done with AI. Anyone who has experience with lung cancer, it's a vicious form of cancer, and gene therapy saved her life. And so I'm very grateful to the innovations that have been done. And what Richard said here on stage actually speaks very truly to me, and so I'm very happy for what he was saying there. But without being too sentimental, I just wanted to share with you some of the things over the next 60 minutes that we're doing at Octopus Deploy that may inform you about things that you can do at your organizations around AI. So Octopus Deploy has been doing a little bit with AI for the past few months, if not years. And I say that because we've been experimenting in different ways. But yeah, this is more of a practical journey. So you can think of Richard as being good cop and I'm bad cop. I'm sort of the alter ego of doing the practical side of this. I also want to be upfront about something, which is we're still figuring this out. We are a product company at the end of the day, but the AI features that we're building in are preliminary, and we're huge consumers of software and technology. And even for us, this space is moving really, really fast. And so just want to put that on the table for a begin. And of course, no conference talk would be complete without memes. So let's go ahead and throw some memes up for the latest ones that have been focused around AI. I particularly like this one involving Sam Altman's house, following a ChatGPT recipe for risotto. This is something that we've seen a lot, that you get the front end representing the back end in different ways. Anyone a fan of the Jetsons? We've got now George working for Rosie. And then finally, this is something of a personal tale of my woe. Theo recently came out saying, how are folks enjoying Opus 4.7? It's kind of like buying a new iPhone every year. It's a little bit better, can't explain why, waiting for 4.8. So we tend to share these memes quite a bit. A little bit about me. I'm a member of the developer relations team at Octopus Deploy, and I've been riding this journey for quite a while. I do a podcast like Richard, and we've been talking about GPT for, well, probably since the inception of GPT-2, and we've been playing around with this stuff for quite a while, and it's been interesting for us to see this go through the various machinations, etc. But I need to be clear, I'm not an AI researcher. I've read a few system cards from here and there, but I'm just a practitioner. I'm a developer who likes to tinker and hack and see what's possible. And so hopefully in this talk you'll gain some of that insight as part of what we're doing at Octopus Deploy. So here's what we intend to cover in this presentation. We're going to start off with the origin story around how we got started with this at Octopus, things that we tried, the tools that we used, some of the demos that we built. I'll show you a bunch of demos of things that we've built around AI so you can get a sense of what's available at a product level. We'll highlight what worked, what didn't work. We'll talk about specifically things that you can think about in terms of AI integrations within your own product. I do have some forecasts, some predictions of where I think this stuff is going from a practitioner perspective, and then I'll also provide some takeaways. So hopefully we'll be able to cover this all in 60 minutes. I'm pretty faithful to this. This is the second time I've done this talk. The first time I did this was at DD Brisbane, and it was mostly tools oriented, but hopefully this will work out. So if you take nothing else from this talk, this is the summary slide, basically. So the key highlights are that AI adoption does work, but in my belief, it works best from the bottom up as opposed to being pushed top down. When I think of being pushed top down on top of developers, I think of a goose being fed food a la foie gras. It never works. So it's best to be driven by osmosis through adoption, etc. We'd also encourage a lot of folks to experiment, and this is what we're doing at Octopus. We're utilizing a wide variety of tools, but they're not mandated. You're free to use Claude, you're free to use anti-gravity, you're free to use Cursor, Visual Studio, Copilot, etc. A wide variety of models are being used at Octopus as well, and they're not mandated. And there's a bit of a co-opetition going on within teams as well. that we're seeing some success from. We do learn a lot from our failures, and believe me, we've had some. We'll highlight some of those. But the biggest thing here, and this is probably, hopefully, a letter of encouragement to y'all, which is AI is an accelerator. It's an enabler. It's not a replacement for you. So I'm with Richard on this. I do not believe that AI will replace us. I believe that they will facilitate the work that we do. The other thing that we do a lot is we make sure that we're measuring our outcomes and not our usage. So yes, we do have analytics and metrics around how much people are using, how many tokens folks are using, but it's the outcomes that matter most. And then finally, we haven't figured this out, including us. We're still experimenting. So unfortunately, I don't have the grand vision of what you need to do at an organizational level, but I can give you some hints along the way of what is probably the right path to follow. And so hopefully that will make sense. So just a quick context here. If you haven't heard of Octopus Deploy, we are an Australian success story. So we're a deployment tool. So if you're involved in CI/CD, if you're shipping software, you're using a deployment tool whether you know it or not. It may be a command line tool, maybe a more elaborate tool like Octopus, and that's essentially what we do. We focus on the continuous delivery side of your software delivery pipeline. And so we're part of a range of tools that you use, and we believe we're the best in the industry. We have over 4,000 customers worldwide. We're currently over 350 people. We are hiring, so you can check us out at octopus.com/careers. And we've got a lot of skin in the game. We've been doing this for a long, long time. Traditionally, we are a .NET shop based on C#, SQL Server, et cetera, but a lot of us have started venturing out into other languages. So we recently rebuilt our CLI in Go, for example. There's a lot of experimentation with Rust, but traditionally, we are a .NET shop, and that's where our heritage lies. So to give you a sense of what this looks like, I'm just going to quickly jump over to a demo here, just so you guys have a sense of what's possible within Octopus. So you can go to an instance like samples.octopus.com. You'll see a UI that looks like this. Of course, we log in. And this is our dashboard. And essentially what we have here is a way of defining our deployment processes. So these are my projects that I have. So you can imagine, just mentally search and replace a project name here with something you're working on in your team. And you can see the status through the dashboard of where your deployments are at. You can jump into one of these deployments, get a running log of what occurred as part of that deployment, and all the steps that went into that deployment itself. We quantify the deployment as part of a deployment process, which is a series of steps that are executed as part of that deployment step. You can modify this accordingly by adding a series of steps. These steps are all the things that you would commonly use within the context of a deployment process. Setting up a database, provisioning a file system, provisioning infrastructure via Terraform, or other means like that. And so these sequence of steps, which can run either as sequentially or in parallel, allow you to define that deployment process, and we track all of that for you. So in less than roughly a minute there, that's essentially all you need to know about Octopus at a very high level. If you're stuck in an elevator and someone asks you what Octopus is, it's a deployment tool. And this is the dashboard we have for it. So when it comes to AI and thinking about, where did we start? How did we get our skin in the game? Where did we begin? We have an origin story, obviously, to this. And the reality is there was no AI strategy, basically. There was a lot of things going on at the time at Octopus, and most of it was driven by developer curiosity. So myself and a few others at Octopus Deploy were kind of like thinking, hey, this is kind of cool. There's lots of really cool things that we can do around generative AI that will facilitate us going forward. And so we started experimenting with things like Copilot. My first inclination was towards ChatGPT to start. But Copilot was really where I think a lot of the coding began, and we started integrating this as part of our build process. Just to lay it out there, we use a combination of CI products, but primarily we're based around GitHub. So we have a lot of private repos. Octopus Deploy itself, the code for that, lives in GitHub. We have a lot of GitHub actions that run in context. Our CI process is based in TeamCity, which is a large part of our heritage as well. And so we were integrating, as part of that process, AI development workflows. So for generative processes, we'd start off with maybe a class file here or there, and then we grew that curiosity as we went through. At that time, and this was probably about a year and a half ago, we experienced a lot of pain points with a lot of these as well. So there's obviously the cost associated with that. But thankfully, our leadership was really great and open about it. They were like, look, if there's an AI tool that you can use and you feel that it will facilitate your job, go ahead and do so. Of course, that comes with some caveats. So we very quickly recognized the fact that because we have things like customer data and things of that ilk, you have to be very careful about what you send up to your instances that you're running in terms of AI. So legal and executive put out a doc and basically said to our developer teams and to various technical folks, listen, you're free to use AI, use it like an adult, be responsible. Do not send any customer data into the cloud, for example. But the other thing that's nice about that is you use tools like Claude, for example, or Copilot, or even ChatGPT. They'll have this concept of workspaces where they won't show or share that data outside of the boundaries that you're working within. So an enterprise account or subscription helps protect against that. And there were some naysayers within the company at this time. So we had a lot of folks who were like, yeah, whatever. You know, even myself, when I started looking at GPT-2, I was like, this is not, you know, AGI. This is really a misnomer. We shouldn't be calling this AI to begin with. But as I quickly discovered, it was actually just a means to an end. And so I kind of gave up the fight there and accepted it, as most people do. So I'm at stage 5 acceptance of the anger chart. So there you go. Eventually, this did grow across the team. So we started off, obviously, and you may find that you might be on stage 2 here inside your organization, but we did have a lot of folks who were driving this charge saying, hey, this is cool, elbowing their, their colleague in the cubicle, either virtually or otherwise, saying, hey, you should check this out. And eventually, we started running some team experiments. And we've seen some success on the team side. So we have lots of different teams within Octopus. One team, for example, is working on the cloud authorization protocol support within Octopus itself. And they gen 95% of their implementation. They did put some guardrails around that in terms of what was generated, but they saw some success with that. We haven't largely adopted that philosophy across Octopus proper, but we are starting to see some benefits of that, and we're starting to, as I say here, share what we've learned as part of that process. So we're sharing those learnings, and we're making it ongoing as part of our daily workflow. Now, the progression that we saw, it varies, but as I say before, it's bottom up, not top down. So the top down approach was more on the legal and the mitigation side, but the bottom up was how do we practically implement these things? Now, the thing about this is that when a lot of this stuff came out, there was a lot of data that supported it. And you could easily cite this data. There was a lot of reports that came out that said that there's a lot of shadow AI going on. You may have heard of this term shadow IT, which is the ability to basically manage your own infrastructure. The report that I had read recently said that shadow AI is widespread, that a lot of developers are utilizing AI tooling without any official sort of blessing from their organizations, and that can be the case. So this is something that I think for a lot of folks in this room, if you're talking to stakeholders, you're talking to management, et cetera, you want them to buy in, and that's going to be really, really important. Now, of course, wouldn't be another presentation about AI unless there was memes, and one meme that I saw was this one. This is one that I created, of course, because there's a lot of hype out there about what is happening in terms of jobs. And so this is one that obviously is relevant.
We're doomed! We need a revolution! Millions of people on the streets! And we gotta do something! And we gotta do it now!
So this was I don't know if you guys saw this, but this was a heat map that came out. This was done by Karpathy, and basically it was a list of job market or jobs in the job market that are under threat by AI. This is available up on GitHub if you're curious to see it. And of course, the reaction to this is like, oh my God, we're all going to be out of work soon. I don't believe this to be the case. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be disruption, yes, like Richard said, but I think it's going to enable us to do more. And it comes back to that old. There was a great adage that was done by Microsoft back during the dot-com, probably circa 2004, which was do more with less. I was at Microsoft at the time. I thought it was a great catchphrase. And the idea was that budgets are shrinking, so you have to be able to be more productive. We have to increase our efficiency. I think that's what's going to happen with AI. It's going to enable us to do more with less in those contexts. And so that's the context for that meme.
We're doomed!
And so, of course, the Anthropic CEO lifecycle, of course, does this same thing. I'm not a believer in this, of course. I think that, when you think about your own role as an organization, and as a developer, there's going to be a lot of FUD that gets spread around. I'm not believing it for 1 second. I've actually been quite effective building out solutions with this stuff. And for those keeping score, I'm actually utilizing Claude quite extensively these days. I know others are using tools like Cursor with a variety of different models. Some people are using Codex, for example. My manager likes to use anti-gravity. I won't hold that against him, but some folks obviously love Gemini. They're utilizing gems, etc. But there's lots of ways to do this. So to get into some of the specifics, here are some of the things that we did at Octopus to kind of make this work. So first and foremost, we're utilizing a lot with code assistance. So these are your copilots, your Claude Code, Cursor, etc., for doing generative AI. There was a lot of work that was done in refactoring as well. Yes, we have this integrated within GitHub. So there's lots of work done at the copilots level, where you have PRs being generated by Claude, for example, and then those will be reviewed, of course. I have some thoughts on reviews as well. And then on other side of things, there was a lot of work that was being done on the chat and research side. So a lot of us were utilizing in, for example, our marketing department, a lot of us were using ChatGPT, or still are. There's a lot of brainstorming that goes on within Claude as well. And that is also for us to navigate code and understand code structure, which is really important. The key idea here is that we didn't pick just one tool. There was a lot of experimentation that was going on. Different teams tried different things. But it turns out that that diversity of choice turned out to be a real win, because it allows us to vary a lot of different opinions on these tools. We are utilizing it for testing as well, but we are going also beyond just code generation. So we do a lot of work with Terraform, for example, or we do a lot of work with YAML, because we care a lot about Kubernetes deployments. And so as a result, authoring YAML files, authoring HCL files, state verifications, etc., that stuff turns out to be really important. And so going beyond what is just generative on the code side is something that we're doing a lot with these days. And we saw some quick results as a result of utilizing these things. So we were able to see a lot of benefits on certainly the boilerplate side of things and scaffolding up projects. For anyone who's actually spent any time with this, you can cook up pretty much a working prototype very quickly. As a sort of an aside, like this is something that I just created earlier today, which is a dashboard of our current fuel supply shortage here in Australia. For those who aren't keeping score, we've got a bit of an issue with the Strait of Hormuz and Iran, etc. But this is something that you can gen up within 5 minutes. Like, this doesn't take long at all. It really does surprise me that the government hasn't done this yet. Like, there's a lot of questions around data and transparency. I'm not trying to get political here, but it just baffles me that we can't do a full-fledged dashboard pretty quickly with the available data. And this is something you can do very easily with something like Claude Code in like less than 5 minutes. Now, whether or not there's accuracy and whether or not the code is well structured is another issue, but you get the idea. There's lots of ways in which you can do this. So scaffolding and boilerplating of code is really a really big win there. It allows you to grok this stuff really easily. And that speaks obviously to unfamiliar code bases. We get a lot of new hires. As I said, we're hiring all the time. And so we get folks who come into our code base and scratch their heads and ask, why did we do it this way? And our code base is not small. We have lots of code out there. And so understanding that and having an assistant that can explain the structure well is something that we benefit from a lot. We're doing it for documentation generation as well. I think that your development process should include this out of the box. So if you're building out new class files, new service endpoints, building out an MCP, this should be well documented, and there's really no excuse now not to have that documentation generated as part of your AI process for generative AI. And of course, debugging as well. Debugging is a very hard skill to learn and master, and this is something that we're utilizing a lot. Most people do utilize this directly just by asking, why did this code fail? Just give me the stack trace, figure it out, please let me know where to point me next. That's a common sort of scenario. And I would imagine you probably experienced this yourself as well. So just to look at an example of some of the workflows that we incorporate on our team. So if I were to jump over to my environment here. So I wanted to go, where do I want to go here? So here's an example of a repo that we have. These are basically constrained by our end-to-end tests, and this is a repo for our cloud auth that's implemented in Octopus Deploy. And you'll see here that we actually have a bot running as part of this context, which is for Claude itself. This is an example of what Richard cited with Copilot itself, but this is a repo that we generated. I think 95% of the code for this repo. I could be wrong on that number, but it is something that we're utilizing as part of this process. The means by which we author this code is through sort of canonical sort of development processes, pull requests, reviews, assigning the review to an individual, and then authoring those accordingly. We do have a rigid guideline around tests as well. A lot of this stuff is actually well authored, and so we do augment this with data through Confluence, for example, and we put guidelines up around this accordingly. And so we will do a lot of work around this sort of thing. We'll that sort of research, plan, edit, and then test workflow is something that we do quite a bit in terms of Claude usage. Some folks use Cursor, as I said, others use anti-gravity as well. We do have instruction files laid out through Claude.md and others for describing these things. And that provides context to the agents that we're utilizing for doing code gen. All right, so moving on to what didn't work. This is more of the honest part of the presentation. We had a lot of problems, especially around where AI would hallucinate and stumble over pretty trivial tasks at times. So we had code that looked correct, but we're calling, in some cases, non-existent APIs. That was a real thing, and we had to correct that. And the general consensus of it was that Copilot is very powerful, but it's still a tool capable of making mistakes. And you always must validate the code that is generated. And so generating too much at once is a trap, and smaller step-by-step prompts will produce dramatically better results. And a lot of this can be guardrailed by your tests. So you can actually focus on TDD, test-driven development, as a means of putting guardrails around what your AIs will gen, because you can use that as a feedback mechanism for iterations. If anyone's here utilizing the Ralph Wiggum loop for development purposes for genning, you'll know that guardrails in the form of well-defined requirements and tests are really, really important. We're not utilizing that inside of Octopus just yet, but it is something that you can do from a development pattern. The Ralph Wiggum loop, by the way, is a pattern that was devised by Jeffrey Huntley. He's an Australian developer. And the idea is that you just basically have a very simple loop of performing work until satisfying certain requirements. And until such time that those requirements are not met, continue to iterate, continue to gen until they are met. At the same time, write down what you've learned for each gen, and then feed that into the next context window of your next iteration. And then that will inform the next run of what it learned during the previous one. Tracking everything in Git, of course, and making sure that everything is well documented. So that's essentially what the Ralph Wiggum loop talks about. And the reason why it's articulated that way is because Ralph is a very simple character. He can do things very easily, but yeah, it's a perfect metaphor, I feel. The other thing that we found was that sometimes there was a lot of code being generated. Now, this is a bit of a bugbear for me because I believe that we're getting to a point where code reviews are almost theater. So what I mean by that is you're seeing a lot of PRs that are containing like thousands, if not tens of thousands of lines of code. And no developer, I think, is going to waste hours and hours just trying to review everything. I mean, everyone's seen the example of where there's a 10-line PR and it gets reviewed for like 2 hours and 10 bugs are found. And then you find the PR that has 5,000 lines, no issues, looks good to me, let it go through. So I think that code review is largely going to become theater in the context of AI generation, because I think that there's too much code to review. And I think that what's going to matter most are your tests, your behaviors, the things that you articulate as your guardrails around what is being specified for your code. And I think that's what matters going forward. And that movement you saw back in, I guess, the noughts, where BDD was becoming a thing, and folks in the Ruby side and all that were talking a lot about this with frameworks like Cucumber, et cetera. I think that's going to become doubly important going forward with AI Gen, where behaviors and requirements are what matter most, not the actual way in which things are done. There's an expression I use a lot when I'm describing AI and sort of these metrics around code gen and review is do as I mean, not what I say. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that we can be super pedantic about what the code is actually doing or what it's actually written as, but the end result is what matters. And I think that we'll be far more efficient as an industry, as developers, if we focus on end results, the outcomes, as opposed to the way in which it got there. Of course, that's I'm sure a lot of controversy, but I've formed that opinion over months of using this stuff. Some other things that we failed on, of course, vague prompts are the big one. So you get a lot of generic output if you don't be specific. And one of the things you can do in your prompts is you can ask it questions. Like you can say, what do you think? Like these prompts are very good at having an interrogation. I also give it challenges like, ask me questions if you have any. I also use voice a lot. I don't know if you all use like voice integration within these models, but I find that I can speak a lot better. I can articulate myself a lot better by voice. And so what I'll do is I'll commonly fire up the voice command within Claude and then speak to it for about half a minute to articulate what it is I'm looking for. And just simply by talking it out, it allows me to articulate the change that I want. And that's a far more efficient way for me to operate with an AI than typing it out, because I'm super pedantic about typing. So there you go. And of course, you got to be aware of rabbit holes that you can crawl into sometimes. Sometimes you can spend a lot of time on sort of tedious programming tasks. And of course, the quote here, never commit code you wouldn't explain to another person, obviously matters, but I would say that the outcome is what is trumping all of this. So the way that we look at this now is kind of what I would like formulate as a trust equation. So the idea here is that we had a lot of concerns when we started adopting AI at Octopus, not only as an integration within a product, but also how we use it as a means for generating code and for building out features. And I think a lot of the early concerns have been largely squashed. So you may have heard of these in the trade press or amongst social media folk. AI will write all the code, we're going to be made redundant. I mean, you saw the memes, etc. We just blankly accept everything we generate. Is our code leaving the network? Is the output production grade, etc., etc.? The reality is that what really is working, I think, these days is that there are a lot of practical uses to this, and we are seeing some tangible results. So GitHub Copilot for Business, for example, Anthropic's enterprise tier, which we utilize, they've got data retention policies and IP protections there, so that data does not leave that workspace. In terms of production readiness, AI output is like just a first draft. It's not production code. So we're not utilizing this and saying, yeah, it compiles, ship it. We also have a bunch of rules within R&D at Octopus. So AI helps us do the heavy lifting, but the creativity, the things that your company are paying you for, the things that make you valuable, the critical thinking, the final responsibility on these changes, that stays with the developer. And I still think, and I firmly believe that the developer at the end of the day is responsible for a lot of these things. So our mindset has shifted from a lot of these early concerns to what works. And we're finding that AI is actually turning out to be pretty practical and very advantageous to us as a company. Now to the good stuff. Some of the things that practices we were able to achieve beyond the initial excitement. And of course, not everything survived. So this workflow that you'll commonly hear about, this research, plan, edit, test workflow that you hear about, that comes directly from our R&D's team guide for AI-assisted development. So we have a large team of developers working inside of R&D, and we commonly ask the AI to explore approaches. So especially at anything that's novel, so any new feature that we've implemented, we make sure that we have a plan associated with that to generate a to-do list, and then we divide the job into smaller and smaller steps. And then we utilize a tool like Claude Code or Cursor. They have plan modes for this. You can easily turn those on just via Bang, etc. There's a lot of ways in which you can do this. So plan before editing. Edit and test in small steps. This is something that we do a lot. We iterate on one change at a time. And this is basically running our linters, our tests, etc. We're doing a lot of validation for every step. And this is really where the instruction file comes into play. So you want to make sure that you quantify these in the form of instructions. And these are really where skills come into play. So if you haven't had any experience with skills, they're just simply markdown files. And they qualify or quantify things that you've learned into a repeatable process. And a lot of us are utilizing skills at Octopus now. So you can have skills form meta skills, for example. And this is the biggest takeaway we have, which is we utilize skills in a very big way. So we have team skills that we propagate at the organizational level. And those describe things as like the things that we work with, projects, deployments, deployment processes, runbooks, etc. And so there's a well definition for that. But in addition to that, we have other skills for other opportunities or other roles as well. So we have skills for our writing style, or we have skills for the way our classes are structured, or skills for defining how we define role responsibility in terms of our OM. These and other sorts of files we articulate. And our support engineers utilize these as well. So every time we have a customer request come through, we have a bunch of markdown files. These are in the form of like Claude.md or a skill file, or various rules that are inside of Cursor or GitHub Copilot. Even we have gems in Gemini as well. Our support engineers will utilize these. These are all kept in sync through a tool called Rule Sync. So Rule Sync, if you haven't seen, just switch over. Sorry, I'm just using two views here at the same time, so it's a bit of a challenge. So this is a repo you can use called Rule Sync. And what this allows you to do, it's a simple utility. And what it does is it just runs as a CLI for keeping rules in sync across teams. And it has widespread support across a variety of different tools. So if you find that you have a lot of rules articulated and you want to share those across, you can utilize this CLI that we use called Rule Sync for syncing those across. And they have a wide set of support for that tool itself. So we use Rule Sync for that. That being said, there are some limitations. So different tools discover rules differently. And so Claude will discover rules differently than, say, Gemini versus Codex as well. And so you need to be cognizant of that when utilizing these. You may have to copy a bunch of files or symlinks across in order to use these effectively. But the rules themselves, they're living documents. The R&D, or the engineers in R&D actually constantly tune them, and they're updating them all the time. And those are the instruction files that quantify our skills. And so by sharing these across, we're able to utilize these quite effectively. If you're looking for other skills to use, for example, you can reference this site here called skills.sh. If I could type. This is by Vercel, and this is a way in which you can discover skills that are in the ecosystem. So if you're looking for a skill, this is like NPM or other sorts of repositories you can use for finding skills. You can run this off the command as well if you're utilizing Claude Code, for example. So if you're utilizing Claude Code, you can certainly run it here as well. But this is a way in which you can find these things. So you can quantify these things and then pull them down quite quickly as part of this. There's lots of ways you can utilize this. We use Rule Sync internally, but there's a lot of ways in which you can use these. Skills.sh, by the way, has over 91,000 skills, I believe now. And so there's a large ecosystem, and it's becoming quite handy. And so this has given us a lot of confidence going forward. So we have these instruction files, and we have these skills articulated. And my recommendation is to start with Claude.md. Define these as part of your configuration, and then use a tool like Rule Sync to sync these across your various teams. You can also install community skills as well if you wish. Also, you want to make sure you manage context. This is part of the reason why the Ralph Wiggum loop exists, is because context windows can get massive, and after a while they have to get shrunk or recompiled. So because LLMs are stateless, you want to make sure that you manage your context effectively. This is where a feature like, say, Claude projects come into play. So Claude projects allow you to persist files, write to disk. They allow you to maintain memory. Those are really effective ways of managing context. And it will collapse and compress context as needed as part of this tool run. But there's lots of ways in which you can manage this. The other thing that I talk a lot about is making sure that you're utilizing AI effectively. So you are responsible for making sure that AI is generating what is required for your implementation. So you want to be really, really good at crafting prompts. Don't be afraid to put a lot of guardrails around this. Guardrails, examples, and you want to make sure that you review all the output that's generated as part of this. And the other thing that we do a lot is we have a Slack channel where we share a lot of this output and examples of wins. So we have a topic AI channel that we share a lot of benefits through, and we say, hey, this has worked for me. One example, I'll show you a very practical example for myself. Because I'm on the developer relations team, the thing that I do a lot of is I do animations, and I generate files and videos. And this is a framework I use called Remotion. You'll find this at remotion.dev. This is a TypeScript framework. You install it via NPM. And what it allows you to do is create programmable videos and animations. And I use this to generate slides and things like that. So if I'm wanting to present a slide and I want to have it animated in a certain way, and I can edit this via TypeScript. I can use remotion. I can articulate this to Claude to generate this stuff. Recently, I've been doing a lot of videos around this stuff, and so I've been talking about this relative to like the Axios security vulnerability. And so you can generate these things quite easily, and these are just done as SVG, and they're available, and they export out as transparent MPEG-4 video files. So you can use this, and I put myself in the bottom right-hand corner, and so I utilize this for my authoring process for video content now. And so you can utilize this in a number of different ways. And so this is one way in which you can be effective just by producing on output. You can put guardrails around this, and I have this articulated inside of a skill as well. So we jump back into Claude here, for example. There's my example that I just built for the fuel supply. I did this earlier this morning. But if I jumped over here to, for example, chat. I don't have that one articulated. I think I do. Do I? Yeah, so this is the one that I articulated here for vibe coding, and it's just generating out the TypeScript necessary for the remotion framework, which is this thing here. So it's very easy to articulate these things as part of prompts. So I've been sharing that out. I've been sharing with folks at marketing and folks on R&D of the stuff that I'm using as part of this, and it turns out to be pretty powerful. One repo you can check out is the Superpowers framework. I don't know if you've heard about this. This is at /superpowers up on GitHub. So just to show you here, sorry, it's just multi-screen makes this difficult. So the Superpowers framework provides a skills framework here. And there's a lot of use out of this for things like planning, et cetera. You'll find these articulated here. So if we take a look at the skills repo here. So if you're doing any brainstorming or you're doing any things of executing as plans, et cetera, the Superpowers framework is really, really powerful, and it's utilized quite heavily within R&D. And so you'll load this up as a skill, and you'll utilize this in terms of your development via prompts. So it turns out to be really nice for that sort of way in which you can follow this pattern. So iteration, planning, incorporating work trees, which is a really cool capability of isolating Git, doing your builds, testing, reviews, and finish. So these are workflows that you can incorporate as part of this. All right, so that's talking about how we utilize it internally. Let's talk a little bit about how we're now leveraging this within the product. So our internal development experience, because this is a developer conference, is important, which is why I'm focusing on it first. But when we start looking at how do we integrate AI into our product, which is what we have, what do we do there? There's lots of ways in which we've done this, and we focus on, just like with AI, where we utilize a lot of different things, we're applying AI in a lot of different ways at Octopus within the product. So one of the ways in which we're doing this is we're leveraging this in terms of how we're framing this where we're doing your DevOps journey. So I know that for a lot of folks, DevOps is not a key core concern of yours. Maybe you don't care about it, et cetera. Maybe you've never heard of Dora. Maybe you've never heard of Dora metrics, et cetera. But the idea here is that when it comes to Dora metrics, those are things like your mean time to recovery, your change failure rate, et cetera. These are qualitative analytics that we care a great deal about because they tie directly into how you do deployments. And so we care a lot about this. And so when we think about these things, we ask the questions of what sort of problems are we trying to solve? We're trying to think about this in terms of new users, but also existing users. So from a product perspective of where we're leveraging AI, how are new users going to benefit, as well as how are old or existing users going to benefit? So one of the ways in which we did this is through our Octopus AI Assistant. This runs as a Chrome extension, and it provides a lot of capabilities out of the box. In fact, let me just show you what this looks like. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to jump over to samples.octopus.app. And this instance you can hit yourself. And this is the 101 demo I showed you earlier. But you'll notice down here, there's this little z-index sort of hovering thing. This is actually the AI assistant. This is a Chrome extension. And the reason why we implemented it this way is because we didn't want to break the product. We want to iterate fast. And so what we said is we'll just annotate the UI with this Chrome extension, and we'll perform operations against the dashboard this way. And so there's lots of ways in which you can do this. You can do the canonical sort of, this is the way that most products do it today. Let's give you a chat window. You can ask questions, and it's kind of useless. So we do have that capability, which great. You know, for new users, that helps. Like, what is a project? What is a deployment process? What's a tenant? These are things that we define inside of Octopus. So for those folks, it turns out to be pretty useful. But there's other things in here. So we started building out these capabilities as well. So we built out things like a value metrics dashboard. So one of the questions that often comes up is, stakeholders will buy Octopus, for example, and then they'll be like, what's the value we're getting out of Octopus? Like, we spent money on this thing. Why is this important to us, et cetera? We can generate, and this is all done via the Chrome extension, we can generate a dashboard that looks like this, and it will iterate through all of your deployment data and then generate for you a rundown of how much engineering costs you've saved by utilizing a tool like this, for example. And this sits outside the product itself. This is all living within that Chrome extension. And so we're annotating that experience through that means. And this is how we're doing that. Now, the delivery vehicle, as I said before, is Octopus, is via the Chrome extension, but it still operates against Octopus itself. There's a bunch of features inside of here, some of which are really useful. So we allow you to create projects via this tool. As I showed you, there are a bunch of dashboards you can incorporate as well. So when you're thinking about your product integration, this might be a delivery means you could do. You could write a Chrome extension, for example. You could also do it via a plugin as well. But the thing you want to experiment with here is the ability to have these capabilities light up as you go. And there are other ways in which we integrate AI as part of Octopus as well. We also have what's called the Best Practices Advisor and another feature called Tier 0 Support. These are leveraging existing CLI capabilities. So we have a linter and we have a CLI, and these are being used under the covers by that Chrome extension. So our linter and CLI live as projects that you can fire off, for example. And this is our CLI that's built in Go. Of course, you have to have a nice, cool ASCII art if you're going to do a CLI. But we utilize this along with a linter to inspect your project description, and then we feed that back into the AI assistant to say, hey, this looks right, that looks wrong, fix this, fix that, et cetera. That's for basically managing your projects in a certain way. So that's part of the Best Practices Advisor that we integrated there. And we also incorporate that for our Tier 0 support. So being able to ask questions of the product without having to pick up a phone or send an email or things like that. These are really, really important capabilities and allow your customers basically to do things on their own accord. So the other thing that we're doing is we're integrating prompts as policies. So we're utilizing LLMs as a policy engine against unstructured DevOps data. And so the idea, this is an interesting idea that we've had, which is basically once you get to a certain size or scale, you have to treat everything as unstructured data, essentially. So LLMs are really good at extracting that data as it's used over time, but you do get unpredictable inputs and outputs as well. So what we do is we convert an Octopus project to text, and we define a prompt describing best practices, and the LLM will generate a compliance report. And that's part of that linter process that we do as part of that. And so you get some really nice capabilities going forward as part of this. One example of this is inside of the AI assistant that we actually have AWS well-architected reports that are generated from this. So this is a capability. There's this best practices feature within from AWS. These well-architected reports, and we generate those for you based on your descriptions within Octopus itself. So these and other sorts of capabilities you can certainly implement at your projects or within your products for facilitating these sorts of ideas. And it goes well beyond this. So we have facilities like what's called a recovery agent. We also have an MCP server as well. And like I said, we're experimenting here. These are not the true one way to do things, but we are facilitating these means because our end goal here is basically to provide an ability for us to work in a lot of different ways. So the recovery agent allows you to get an explanation of why a deployment failed. So it will inspect the deployment process and the failure and the codes, et cetera, and then diagnose a reason why it failed and possibly a resolution. And of course, our MCP server, which you can integrate in a variety of tools as well. So to quickly show you what those look like here, so inside of Octopus, if I jump back to my samples instance, and again, it really depends on context here. You don't have to expose these all the time. So the AI assistant, as I said before, lives down here as a Chrome extension. But sometimes you may want to expose those AI capabilities at certain times. And what I need to do here is I have to find a deployment that's failed. Now, because Octopus is so rock solid, I have no deployment failures. Everything's green. Let me just check here. I got to find one that's actually failed. So let's see. I'll go to blue-green, possibly. There's one. So red. All right, so when I click on this, I showed you this view earlier. It gives you a rundown of what occurred, but this is a new capability inside of Octopus now, this recovery agent capability. We only expose this if a deployment fails. And so what this will do is it'll go off and execute a reading against the logs itself. Under the covers, we use GPT. That's not an indictment of the other models. It's just the one that we incorporate. We use Azure functions as the backend for this as well. But we gather context as part of this, and we expose the reasons why this possibly failed in this instance here. So we have a step inside of our deployment process here called the manual deployment process step. And what that means is you have to grab a human being and get them to approve a deployment to occur. And so that's what occurred here. It timed out because it was never approved. And so that's why it failed. But this is an example of a way in which you can expose AI capabilities within your own product lines. It's subtle, but it's very helpful because it's contextual. You want to expose AI capabilities like this when it matters and when it makes sense to the end user, which is what we're doing here. So that's an example of the recovery agent. Of course, we have our MCP as well, which is here up on GitHub. And our MCP exposes a bunch of endpoints as well. There are arguments whether MCP will win in the end. I'm not sure. So Model Context Protocol, or MCP, is this idea that you can expose functionality via your service endpoints to agents and to chat context, et cetera, and allow them to do more meaningful things against your endpoints. We've exposed that. It's not the full set of endpoints that are available, and certainly there are alternatives to this. As an example, there is a protocol called llms.txt. Oops. And this is another means of getting that same information. So what you do here is it's like publishing a service discovery document. Basically, you're saying these are the types of HTTP verbs and nouns, and these are the semantic sort of ways in which you can interface with a product via service calls. llms.txt is something you can provide to an agent to give it some semantic weight. And that's one of the things that we've done as well. So we have this under an experimental endpoint as well, which is /APIs are endpoints. And then if you go to experiments, I believe it's experimental llms.txt. Yeah. So this is our text document that you'll feed into an endpoint, or excuse me, to an AI. And it basically describes the way in which you can interface with Octopus via HTTP verbs and actions. So these are the service endpoints that we expose. We are a service-first API, first implementation, and so this is another means in which you can do this sort of thing. Whether or not this will win is left up for debate. I'm not sure what is the right approach here. We're discovering this as we go. Some people have called for the death of MCP. We'll see, because it's not well fleshed out. But there are ways in which you can do this, and we are certainly looking at all means that we have for doing these sorts of things. So I showed you this example earlier. So that's kind of some of the ways in which we're doing this. Now, to underscore or underline some of the things that we're seeing at the level of the industry, we have a report that we've published called the AI Pulse Report. You can find this at octopus.com. And we've made a lot of observations there. We found that we're seeing a lot of adoption by developers. So this is the non-hype aspect. Developers are adopting at a level in the high 90s in terms of percentage. And that's just 1 quarter ago. It was around 90% last quarter. It's at 93% now of developers that are surveyed by a variety of surveys. This is like a meta-analysis. Are utilizing AI coding tools. So they're utilizing this. And they're seeing a lot of wins in terms of time saved. So roughly 3.9 hours per week saved. And then 27% of merge code is being generated by AIs. So you're seeing a lot of success on this level. And it's not hype. This is actual fact. We're seeing this on our own end as well. A lot of this stuff is being generated. And if you want to take a look at our Pulse report, you can take a look at that. In fact, the author is one of the authors is at our booth, so you can go talk to her if you're so inclined. We're seeing this also across various companies. So Cloudflare, for example, in April 2026, they formed a Tiger team that they built out an agents.md file, and that was serviced across 3,900 repos. So they utilized this across those repos, and those basically allowed an AI code reviewer to run for every single merge request. And so this is that 93% adoption rate that I was talking about. Others like Shopify have used this as well. So an internal memo, again, this is the top-down approach that I'm not a huge fan of, but an internal memo went out that said that AI usage is now the baseline expectation. And so managers are inclined to request that their developers are utilizing this going forward. And then Google, of course, is talking a lot about this as well. One of the things that they talk about, which I'm not a huge fan of, is this idea of vibe deployments as well. So this is a term that's come up recently. I'm not a huge fan of that. And the reason why is because you want your deployments to be deterministic. You do not want them to hallucinate. You don't want it to be like, 87% chance that it will deploy to the right server, You want it to be deterministic. You want to know that it went to the right place. And so vibe coding is fine. Vibe deployments, I'm not so much of a fan. So where is this all going? And this is the sort of forward-looking part of the talk. Again, I mentioned this about vibe deployments are becoming slowly a thing, I think, and I'm not a fan of this. So I would resist the urge to just chuck stuff over the wall that tools and tool vendors are probably prescribing. I've done a video about this up on YouTube where I talk a little bit about this. The reason why is because you want your deployment pipelines to be rock solid, deterministic. You want to be assured that they're going to repeat the same pattern each and every time. As I said earlier, I think code review is becoming theater. I think that you're seeing a lot of PRs that are just getting bigger, and developers it's like this mountain of code that's just building higher and higher, and it's like the new backlog, which are code reviews. And I've maintained open source repositories myself. Maintaining our PR log is like the hardest job if you're maintaining an open source repository, because you're just constantly reviewing them, and you get a lot of slop that comes in. But the reality is that you can get around this by having really good tests, having good, clear guidelines or guardrails, et cetera, or requirements. So make sure to prescribe to that if you can. And this is going to be a little bit controversial, but I am a believer in it. You're seeing the rise of TUIs, or terminal UIs. And so there's a bit of a meme out there that talks about the end of the UI, where you're seeing these agentic workflows that never see a UI ever that are now executing. Dashboards are the fallback and not the default. Despite the fact that I've just shown you a dashboard, this is something we're thinking ourselves. A common question I would sometimes pose to our engineers is like, imagine Octopus had no UI. Now what do we do? Because oftentimes we default as engineers, they'll just click the button. They'll just do this. Imagine there is no UI. Imagine it's just a service endpoint you have to call into. Whether you like it or not, that's where we're going with agentic workflows. That's going to take us there kicking and screaming. So if you're wholly dependent upon a UI, you want to consider your service layer very, very carefully. You want to make sure that's as serviceable as possible. And then context-aware agents. This is the same message we got during the service-oriented architecture memes that came out back in the day, all that stuff that came out around web services. What's old is new, again, and I think that with agentic workflows, we're seeing a lot of that as well. This is where your MCP servers come into play. So being able to describe your service endpoints via that or through LLMs.txt is going to be important. You're seeing a lot of this being done inside of skills as well. So skills.sh or other means are ways in which you can load these up. And we're seeing a large amount of skills that are being authored today. Just as a context here, this is the argument of LLMs.txt versus MCP. There's no clear winner right now, so we'll see how that plays out. And then finally, the takeaways from this talk, obviously, make sure that this works for you. And if you are on the fence about AI, just get started. Build something out. Start today, start this week. Start building out something. Make a dashboard for a fuel supply. I don't know, do something that's useful. Richard talked about how you're seeing all these bespoke software solutions. I think it's true. You're going to see a lot of these artisanal solutions for software that are going to come out, and it's going to be really interesting. From there, start building out instruction files. Build out a Claude.md file that prescribes or has aspirations around what looks best. And then start installing some of those community skills that you saw from Vercel at skills.sh. There's a lot of goodness there. Then as you start building this out, start elbowing your partner in the cubicle next to you or something. Let them know, hey, this is kind of cool. Why don't you check it out? And here's what I generated. Maybe start up a Slack channel of wins, of topic AI is what we have. You can do something similar. We also have a school AI channel as well where we share best practices. And then once you get started and you start building up enough muscle and you've built up enough scar tissue, you can start prescribing best practices. And then as you go through this, you can start measuring this stuff, and we have means in which you can do that as well. But the idea here is you want it to be iterative, you want it to be slow, you want it to be prescriptive, and I think you'll see a lot of benefits going forward. I'm a huge fan of this. I think that it has a lot of wins, tangible wins. I don't think any of us are going to be out of a job anytime soon, despite what Jack Dorsey and others are doing. I think that's just a smoke screen, if you ask me. I think that there's a lot of benefits that are coming to us as developers going forward as a result of this. So finally, just to reiterate what we shared at the beginning, AI adoption works best bottom up, not top down. So remember the analogy of letting developers learn and letting them share their best practices. Also, let them experiment. Don't mandate a particular agent, a particular model. There's tons of models out there, and they're having shootouts all the time, and there's no one clear winner right now. I use Claude, but use what works for you. Failures teach more than successes. That is certainly true, and the idea here is you want to basically learn by doing. AI is an accelerator. It's not a replacement. I certainly see it as a facilitator. You could look at it the same way as your compiler. Your compiler pretty much does the same thing. It takes your programming code and puts it into assembly of an ism, if you will, and then that runs into bytecode. It's the same idea there. I mean, you could certainly write at that instruction level if you wanted to. And AI is basically doing the same, except it's one level up. And as Richard was saying, Richard's been old enough to see a lot of these changes happen over the time. I'm 49. I've been in the industry for a long time. I've seen these changes happen too. We always go up the stack. We always go up the stack whenever we want to fix the next problem. This is the next step up. This is the next rung up on the ladder. And so I would encourage you all to take the next rung. And measure your outcomes, not in AI usage. You want to make sure you're getting tangible results. And then finally, and this is the most important thing, is none of us know what we're doing. Like we're really trying to just figure this out as we go. What that looks like, not only from a development side, but also from how it integrates within the product. And I think you need to think about these things really, really carefully as you go through. Some resources just to share before we wrap up. We've got our AI features listed at octopus.com/AI. Check it out. Our Pulse report is also up on our website as well. You can download that. I mentioned the DX Impact Report. This is one that I found that is really, really useful. There's a Superpowers framework, which we're a huge fan of as well, which is up on GitHub. The agent skills directory I showed you earlier at skills.sh, and then there's the lms.txt specification if you're so inclined. Lots of resources there. Believe me, there's more. There's constantly stuff going on in this space. But yeah, lots of stuff worthwhile. And with that, I'll let you all get back to your conference. Hope you're enjoying NDC. Thanks a lot.